November 19th, 2025. This is how I type. I woke up today feeling a little parfait. And just like I do every other week, I woke up questioning the very existence of my YouTube videos. What am I doing? I love my videos, but at the same time, why do I care so much about what other people think? I wish I didn't see someone else's message and just absorb their thoughts like crazy. I think that's a typical thing of creatives, though. You did a tarot reading this morning, and you know what that tarot reading said? It's literally right behind you. Stay true to yourself and the things that you know. And yes, with the accumulation of more assets, you will also receive more scrutiny, but you are not somebody to just ignore those things. You were beginning to lose the illusion that you were typing on an actual keyboard. But is that illusion even real? Look at how high you're typing. These aren't where keyboards exist. Anyway, that tarot reading really put you back on track. Be you, is what it said. You've already succeeded. Just keep tapping into what you're doing. Hey everyone, welcome back to BookSquirrel, and this is my review of Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower. BookSquirrel, I don't know. Parable of the Sower is the second book from my Black authored TBR list. It barely missed the cut for my sci-fi TBR list. So when I created my Black authored TBR list, I knew I really wanted to include this book. Glad that I finally got around to reading it, and I'm excited to talk about it. I think this is a very thought-provoking book. As always on my channel, when I review a book that I've finished, I will score it using my ACORN scoring system, which looks at the book's approach, characters, offerings, readability, and narration. Each one of those has a potential 20 acorns for a total potential of 100 acorns. And just as a random aside, I really love the appearance of acorns in this book. There are some really weird things that tie us emotionally to a book, and I don't know, I just kind of feel like in this book, every time that acorns was mentioned, I felt just that much closer to Lauren and her journey. But before I get into the scoring of the book, I do want to go over some of the details. Parable of the Sower is approximately 329 pages. My book has a foreword by LeVar Burton, an afterword by author N.K. Jemisin, and it also has an excerpt from the second book in this duology. It was originally going to be a trilogy, but then Octavia passed away before the third book was written. This copy was originally published in December of 2023. The second book that I did mention in this duology is called Parable of the Talents, and I am intrigued to read that book, so I might add that to a future TBR. And here is the blurb. When global climate change and economic crises lead to social chaos in the early 2020s, California becomes full of dangers, from pervasive water shortage to masses of vagabonds who will do anything to live to see another day. 15-year-old Lauren Olamina lives inside a gated community with her preacher father, family, and neighbors, sheltered from the surrounding anarchy. In a society where any vulnerability is a risk, she suffers from hyper-empathy, a debilitating sensitivity to others' emotions. Precocious and clear-eyed, Lauren must make her voice heard in order to protect her loved ones from the imminent disasters her small community stubbornly ignores. But what begins as a fight for survival soon leads to something much more: the birth of a new faith and a startling vision of human destiny. All right, let's get to the acorns. November 14th, 2025. Today I started reading Octavia E. Butler's Parable of the Sower. The blurb made me a little intimidated, especially given how much of the themes are relevant to today. Kind of reminded me of how nervous I was to watch Handmaid's Tale, which I still haven't finished. Hard themes during hard times seem hard squared? Approach. It's kind of nuts how many things Octavia E. Butler predicted in the 90s because of how much she actually is getting right. And so with the blurb, I was a little nervous to dive in. And the cover, I like the cover, but at the same time, it was so abstract to me. I wasn't entirely sure what expectations it was setting. Combined with the fact that Parable of the Sower is actually a story from the Bible, I kind of got the sense that maybe this book wasn't so futuristic as it was bringing back the past. And so I was a little indifferent to it. Since I include the first 10% in my approach score, I started reading the book and I was immediately inspired. I found it to be very poignant. I'm not one who usually cares about quotations. I don't really include quotations much in my reviews, and yet I was finding myself wanting to capture so many quotes just from the first 10% alone. Like almost every other page I was writing something down, and I'll share just a couple of them with you. We can afford the stars. I love that so much. It gave me chills. Another quote. Maybe God is a kind of big kid playing with his toys. I just love the way that Octavia E. Butler from the beginning just starts to just really delve into the messages and the themes of the book. Bread and circuses. Politicians and corporations get the bread, and we get the circuses. She jumps on me for sharing pain with the living, but she tries to share it with the dead. Like, I did have a little bit of intimidation, as I mentioned, with the blurb, and the cover was a bit abstract. I frankly don't think either of them really do the actual story justice. You're not really going to be able to tell from the blurb how amazing Octavia E. Butler's writing is. And frankly, I still don't entirely understand why the cover is the way it is. So my approach was very positive overall, just a little bit of setback in the intimidation and confusion with the outside stuffs. So I give Parable of the Sower 18 out of 20 acorns in approach. November 15th, 2025. Goodness gracious, there are a lot of characters in this book. I get that there's a community in a cul-de-sac, and we're focusing a lot on the people that are trying to survive there. And I do think that Octavia Butler is doing a great job in establishing a sense of community. But goodness gracious, I try to keep a character list, and this is a lot. And yet I don't think I would want it any other way. I like this more than I did Swan Songs. Characters. I think one of the best highlights in this book are the characters. If you've been watching any of my reviews, you know that I'm really big on characters. I'm big on character development. I'm big on psychology of characters, on character conflict. And while this is one of the densest character soups I've read, I really feel like there's a purpose to kind of the overwhelm that Octavia E. Butler puts in the sheer number of the characters in this cul-de-sac. You have as many people as possible trying to survive, right? And so you're going to have houses that are overstuffed with people in a very uncomfortable way, because it's better to live packed in a somewhat safe environment than to live out in this world on the outside of the walls that Octavia has established. And because there are so many people trying to survive in this cul-de-sac, it really does establish this sense of community that Octavia was going for. And it also shows how brilliant she is with introducing characters and fleshing them out to a variety of degrees. Sometimes you get a book where it's like, so-and-so walked in the room, they looked like this, they were wearing this, they were posed like this, and it just gets to a point where it's like, okay, how long are we going to take a break of what's actually going on just to analyze this character? And Octavia does not do that at all. What she will do instead is almost these throwaway lines where if it's relevant to what's happening in the scene, she'll say, oh, and so, blah, blah, blah. Like, you might not even know who this character is, but the main character does. And so she'll just have this throwaway thought. She really does this like drip character development with a lot of these neighborhood people, where she really only brings them up when they're relevant to what's going on. She's not going to tell you a whole lot about a person if it has nothing to do with what she's writing in the book. When it comes to including a wide variety of characters in a story, this is the expert right here. And the characters are also so specific in their own ways. Like, it really feels like an iceberg. There's this common idea, especially in world building, where you want to give the illusion that there's a lot more here than what you're actually including in the story. George R.R. Martin did that incredibly well. And I really feel like Octavia was tapping into this as well. There's an overwhelm that comes with that, but it gives you this sense of this is a fleshed out world. She does taper out the introduction of characters in the second half, which is good. And she even switches up how she presents characters and how much we get to know characters, because in the second half, it becomes much more important for her to know as much as she can about everybody that's around her. And Octavia meets that change. And it's just expertise. So it's probably no surprise that I give Parable of the Sower a 20 out of 20 in characters. November 16th, 2025. I'm beginning to absorb the message of this book. I've always been someone who's relatively pragmatic, and I really like the way that this book looks at religion from a pragmatic perspective. I've said it many times that the one constant is change, and this book really taps into that. Offerings. When it comes to the offerings of Parable of the Sower, I'm really of two distinct minds. One mind, which is the much larger perspective, is that there's actually a lot here. It offers a fully fleshed out dystopian future that does have a lot of mirroring of what's going on today. It talks about the struggles of climate change. It talks about failing leadership, putting money away from communities and towards things that are really not meant to actually lift the people up. The rise in drug use, the rise in crimes, all the fears, right? All the fears. And I'm not going to judge it based off of how prophetic it really was, even though that is an interesting aspect and offering of this book. She really uses this dystopia that she's created to set the stage for thought-provoking ideas. The main character in this book is in the process of creating her own belief system that isn't based off of power. It isn't based off of manipulating people. It's from the perspective of what she sees as reality. She's a preacher's daughter, and so she has a lot of exposure to the Bible and exposure to church and faith, and yet she doesn't entirely agree with a lot of the things that are being taught. She sees other people's belief systems kind of popping up in this anarchistic world where people kind of get to choose what they worship, whether that's a drug, whether that's fire. And so the main character is very justified in coming up with her own truth. And I think that ultimately is the biggest offering that is in this book. There are a couple of other ideas, some of which I don't really cling to. That's the second mind I have of this book. When it comes to offerings, I do think they're a little one note at times, in the sense that it's kind of the same message being hit over the head a lot. There was just a little bit of that experience that I felt to be a little monotonous and a little contradictory at times. Take that for what it is. I still think Octavia E. Butler's perspective on change and on the importance of being kind and community and working together is a huge plus. So having said all of that, I give Parable of the Sower a 19 out of 20 in offerings. November 17th, 2025. My keyboard keeps changing. I decided to take today to make an introductory video, which is now on my channel, but I kind of needed a break from this book, just a little one. It's intense, and even though it reads very quickly, it's not the easiest theme to absorb. There's a lot of death, there's a lot of paranoia, and as someone who's empathetic myself, being in the mind of someone who's always scared of what's around the corner, even with the confidence this main character has, is still quite draining. Readability. I kind of said it all in the bit, but when it comes to Parable of the Sower, the readability is very strong. I find it to be incredibly well written. The language is incredibly accessible. The book itself is not that long. and it is very engaging. And so I found myself flying through the pages when I would sit down and read. I would literally finish a chapter, go back to see how much I had read, and it would be like, whoa, I got through all of that. Like it is a page turner, in my opinion. As I mentioned in characters, this is name soup central. I don't know if I should have kept a catalog of every single named character that was brought up in this book. I was scared I would lose track of these people, but Octavia E. Butler does a really good job of kind of reminding you of who people are at certain points. Still, it caused me to pause a lot. I know that's my own practice. I find that I have a more enjoyable experience when I have something I can reference to remind me of who people are, because I seriously have a really hard time remembering names. I will say there's probably a couple of strong triggers in this book. I'm not a religious person, so I didn't mind Lauren's dissecting of faith in this book. But if you are a very religious person, if you have a religion that you really cling to, especially Christianity, you might feel a certain way about reading this book. Just wanted to throw that out there. It does include a lot of strong criticism of established religion, which I find to be very fair, but at the same time, I can understand how some people would be turned off from it. There's quite a lot of sexual and relationship taboos in this story as well. Because of this world that Octavia has envisioned, there's a lot of anarchy. There's a lot of people forcing themselves on other people, whether that's to take their possessions or even. And so that is definitely a trigger warning. And there is a lot of graphic imagery, like almost instantly. And throughout the book, you are going to have depictions of dead people and in ways that can be very disturbing. It's not the easiest read. So having said all of that, I give Parable of the Sower 17 out of 20 acorns in readability. November 18th, 2025. Today I finished reading Parable of the Sower. There's a lot of awesome narration in this book. I was very inspired by the beginning, and frankly, I think I liked the first half of the book better. The second half of the book feels almost like a completely different book. I feel like this was a very realistic book, and I feel like she landed this ship a lot better than some other dystopian authors. Let's be real. Narration. Parable of the Sower is told in first-person perspective, past tense, and it's written out like a diary. If you couldn't tell from my little bit that I was doing, the book is told through a series of diary entries in a way, journal entries, but they don't really read entirely like journal entries. Mostly in journal entries that you find of people actually writing journals, you're not going to see a whole lot of specific dialogue. You're not going to see a whole lot of every detail being remembered of the way they turned, the way they looked in every moment. But I do like that it's told in this chronological order. At the beginning of every chunk, you get the date. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the narration. When it comes to story structure, it really almost feels like this is two books. The first half covers a couple of years that pass by pretty quickly, and the second half really delves in with a much more detailed pace. You really are getting into every little nitty-gritty with the second part of the book, whereas the first part is more grand, sweeping instances, and there will be times where entire months will go by and Lauren won't have written a journal entry. When it comes to my enjoyment of the book, I would say I liked the first half a little bit more. I liked the pacing of the first half. I found that there were more instances of like actual rest, and the second half was much more escalated throughout. But to me, they were just kind of like two different vibes. If I were to liken them to anything, I would say that the first half of the book reminded me a lot of one of my favorite musicals, Fiddler on the Roof, where you have Tevye looking at the world around him, going from a place of tradition, literally, to little by little his daughters growing up and creating their own lives, to his entire community changing because the outside world is changing. It really embodied that vibe of change over time and how you will eventually find yourself in a place that you almost don't even recognize. And then the second half of the book, it's much more along the lines of the other dystopian novels I've read, primarily like Swan Song, where the danger is just much more escalated. You're in constant survival mode, and there's that fatigue that I get as a reader in reading that. But that's the point of the book, right? Dystopian books aren't really made to give you the sense of safety, right? And I think that Octavia E. Butler does an amazing job with both sections of the book. I was incredibly inspired by a lot of it, especially the first half. And one thing that I do want to point out that I just love about this book is that in the first 10%, Octavia provides a hook. And I wrote it down. She says, "In spite of what my father will say or do to me, in spite of the poisonous rottenness outside the wall where I might be exiled, I'll have to do something about it." And it's like, I wish more authors would really dig into the promise of their book, really dig into a declarative statement like that that says, this is what you can expect this book to be about. And she does that. And she still keeps it very abstract, and yet at the same time, it's pointed enough to tell you this is what this book is about. I feel like more than not, this book was actually very positive in narration. Even though the second half wasn't my cup of tea, I'm just kind of realizing that dystopian novels, I think, are just not my jam. But that's fine. Overall, I think this was a very successful book. So I give Parable of the Sower an 18 out of 20 in narration. Overall, I think Parable of the Sower is an excellent book. I gave it a total of 92 out of 100 acorns, which to me is an A. This is a success. I can see why this book resonated with a lot of people. I can see why this book is as lauded. It has a foreword by LeVar Burton and an afterword by N.K. Jemisin. I mean, this book has been talked about, and I think this, of all the dystopian books that I've read so far, this is the best one. And my score really reflects that. Next on the list, I am going to be reading Not Without Laughter by Langston Hughes. The two books I have remaining for November are this one and then Consider Phlebas by Ian M. Banks, which is down here. This is a shorter book. I'm going to be able to get through it pretty quickly, I think. And I'm also a little hesitant to read another sci-fi right after this. I really don't know much about the Culture series. I'm looking forward to it. I'm hoping that it's a more positive note to end on, because this month has been quite a psychological journey for me. So next up is going to be Not Without Laughter, and I look forward to it. So I'll see you in the review video for that when that comes out. Let me know what you're reading in the comments below, and I hope you're having a wonderful whatever, and I will talk to you next time. Until then, BookSquirrel out. Bye. BookSquirrel. I don't know.